Hi, and welcome to my session on the SCOM 2021 about monitoring your hybrid environments. My name is Dieter Wijckmans, and I'm so thrilled to be part of this SCOM 2021, which is basically a marathon with all SCOMness, of course. So this session will be about monitoring and seeing which tool you're actually going to use in which scenario. A little bit about myself first. It's always nice to get acquainted. My name is Dieter Wijckmans. I am a managing consultant at Obvious, and there in Obvious we deliver services to customers regarding workplace, but also regarding Azure and monitoring and such. I've included my Twitter handle and my email in there as well. So if you have questions during or after the session, please feel free to connect and send me a mail. I will be happy to get your solution on the road or whatever. I've also included our website address, so we can actually see, or you can actually see what kind of services we offer. Last but not least, I've added a picture of one of my hobbies. I try to keep VW bugs and buses on the road when I have some time left. That's usually between 3 and 5 a.m. So I'm also a CDM MVP, which is a Cloud and Data Center Management MVP since 2014. At that point, working a lot with operations manager, still working with operations manager, but of course I broadened my horizon as well to the Azure environment, which is basically the pinpoint of today, that we're going to look at the tools which are available for your hybrid environment and how you can actually integrate them and make sure that they are working flawless to get your monitoring solution. So I always start with my motto: it's doing common things uncommonly well that brings success. As long as people are still flying into projects without looking at the deeper things, I'm keeping this on. I'm doing now sessions for more than 10 years and it's still on there. So that's still my motto, where I do all my projects with. A couple of things. First of all, if you want to connect or if you have questions or whatever, we have a Slack channel, which is comaton.slack.com/join. So you can ask vendors, you can connect with the speakers, yours truly, and you can network and mingle. Again, no mic is no problem, because you can always send us a small text message to Slack. We also have a Zoom meeting where we have a SCOM Cafe. And for all more detailed info, you can always go to scomaton.com. And if you have questions, there is a channel available on the GoToWebinar chat, which will record your question, and of course we will be happily answer them afterwards. If that takes too long, of course, we can always connect outside of Scomaton and then go from there. So the agenda for today, I briefly touched it already. We're gonna take a step back and look at our options first. Again, a lot of people are flying into the projects and are actually doing a lot of things without thinking proper solutions and proper tools first. So that's what I'm gonna go over with you today as a goal of this webinar. Then we're going to choose the tool which we're going to use. Why do we actually choose? And afterwards, of course, I'm going to demo the difference between the different tools and how you can use both tools for the same scenario. Afterwards, there's also a Q&A. Again, if you have questions during the session, please feel free to reach out. So first things first, what are my options? How to actually start the groundwork before choosing a tool, before actually going into a monitoring project. I've done a lot of monitoring projects, and it's always the same questions that come mind. So if you ask a couple of questions, you know already what the focus is, what you need to monitor, what are the different things that are very crucial. And these are the things we have to list up first before we can actually go in and choose a tool and create a scenario. I've seen so many people who actually go in with a tool of their preference, and then in the middle of the project they come to the conclusion that the tool probably is not 100% or even not 80% covering all the options which are necessary for monitoring, and at that point it will be a very hard discussion, to be honest. So this is one of the, let's say, typical images. So what companies actually use and need, and what monitoring can do below the surface. Most of the companies, they aren't even touching the edges of what we can do with monitoring. And this is something that I really want to stress out, because there's so much more in the tools, but we need to decide what we're actually going to use, and we need to start working from the ground up and have proper monitoring before we can go into the specials or in the special applications or whatsoever. A lot of companies, they want monitoring for their application, but they lack the monitoring for the foundation or for the infrastructure where the application is running on. And if you neglect one of both of them, you will never have 360 monitoring, which is also one of the challenges for today if you're running workloads on premises, but also in the cloud. So these are a couple of questions I always ask new customers or even existing customers. What to monitor? Start with the simple 3 rules or the simple question. First of all, the rule 1 or category 1 is quite simple. If this breaks, it will get me fired, or at least the fire alarm or the virtual fire alarm will go off. So these are the crown jewels of our environment. This needs to be running all the time. I always tell people, if you have a web shop and something goes down, to be honest, you don't care whether in the backend SharePoint is down if it's not supporting your web shop. Your web shop is your number one money maker, so you need to make sure that you have that in place. Rule number 2 is the critical ones, and there you always have to ask yourself, do you want me to be woken up at 2 a.m.? This is a typical question. If I ask a customer, what do you want to see monitored? They always tell me everything. And as soon as I ask the second question, where do you want to actually be at 2 a.m. when the phone rings, or what do they have to tell you? They basically don't care when it's a load balancing of 5 servers and 1 is down and 4 servers are still taking the load. But if 4 servers are down and 1 server is taking the load, it's a completely different story. So we have to look into that, of course. And last but not least, the less critical ones, if something is missed, but the operations were still going on, at that point you can always, let's say, enhance or advance your monitoring. But of course, there was no interruption in your money making, so it's basically not that important. So these are the 3 categories. So first of all, what are the 3 categories? Like I mentioned before, your custom line of business applications, custom events, custom performance monitorings whatsoever. Then you have your core line of business applications off the shelf. So you need to have your supporting services like email, Skype, and you need to have high level monitoring of the service. And then, of course, what should wake me up at 2 a.m., of course, the line of business applications which are preventing, for example, if they are down, that you can't open the stores or you can't open anything else. I've seen a lot of monitoring projects from industrial to distribution to retail, and it always comes down to that they actually know what basically needs to be given to a driver, for example, before he can actually leave the lot with the goods in his lorry. If this paper can't be printed, he can't move, and the goods will not be shipped. So that paper is key to make sure that the process of shipping the goods is indeed done. How do we get better? Of course, monitoring, I don't have to explain this, is a living thing. It's constantly evolving as IT or the IT infrastructure is evolving as well. We're going to see later on in the session as well that monitoring space evolved from SCOM to Azure Monitor, but also back. So it's a great way to see that 2 tools from the same family but serving another purpose, although they are serving monitoring but on a different platform, that they are still working together to get the job done. So where to start? I'm not going to go over all these because my time is unfortunately limited to 45 minutes. And I sure want to give you a lot of, let's say, demos. So I'm just going to quickly go over them. Of course, the slides will be available afterwards, but it's just to stress that you really need to focus on those money makers before you continue. So if you know, or if you are down with all the different services that are required or that are identified as business critical, you now need to find out which tool you're actually going to use. We all know that there are a lot of monitoring tools in the monitoring sphere or the monitoring spectrum, but of course we all have our favorite ones. My personal favorite one is Operations Manager, but there are a couple of others out there as well. Operations Manager, and now in combination with Azure Monitor, although there are some things that we need to, let's say, clarify before we can actually go into, let's say, a scenario which tool to use first, because they both were different tools, but now they are coming closely together and they are even overlapping in certain areas. So first of all, Azure Monitor. Those who already worked with Azure Monitor, they know that Azure Monitor is built in Azure. The name itself says it already, but Azure Monitor is not a service, it's not one service, it's a combination, or let's say a tool of different combinations with services in the backend, Azure Log Analytics, Azure App Insights and such. So we really need to see, we need to clarify that Azure Monitor is basically your SCOM console, to be honest, in the cloud, but it's not SCOM in the cloud, of course. You need to think in scenarios. Of course, your data remains in the workspace. In Azure, it's a Log Analytics workspace. From time to time, everything is based on. And the cool thing is that you can compare it with your data warehouse. So it's your SQL and data warehouse, which is residing in the cloud. And the data is all available. It's relatively easy onboarding, because if you deploy a virtual machine, for example, there's already a possibility to automatically put it in Azure Monitor. And even now with Azure Auto Manage, you can make sure that everything is monitored in the right workspace everywhere. So Azure Monitor is covering almost all aspects of Azure. You control the visualization if needed, and you still need to build your own monitoring flows. I hope they're not flaws. And Azure Monitor is also available for on-premise service. So if your workloads or the primary focus of your workloads is on Azure, but you still have like 2 or 3 servers running in an on-premises environment, there's basically no need to make the cost to install SCOM. You can install them with an Azure monitoring, Azure agent, monitoring agent, the Microsoft monitoring agent, and then you can manage them in Azure Monitor as well. On the other hand, we all know SCOM, or we pretend to know it, of course, because a lot of things or a lot of aspects in SCOM are different. It's still your one-stop shop for monitoring on premises, to be honest. Virtually anything is able to be monitored by SCOM. If you go beyond the standard management packs and you are going to go into custom management packs, you can even pull in data from APIs and whatsoever and start monitoring. I for once started monitoring my electricity consumption, my Nest thermostat. It's all possible as long as you have data, you can monitor it with SCOM. Because it has a high grade of customizable monitoring. The investments in SCOM are not lost. That was one of the main questions I got when Azure Monitor arose, that SCOM was slowly going away, which is not the case, because a couple of years later SCOM is still there. A lot of investments on the back end of Microsoft are still done. So, and for a lot of companies, SCOM is still the start of your internal ITIL process. More on that later, but a lot of, let's say, tools do get their alerts out of SCOM. So if you have Azure Monitor into the equation, you need to make sure that you also manage that process. So a couple of things which are also regularly asked at events, unfortunately virtual events now, but still I hope we can see each other soon again in person. Azure Monitor is SCOM in the cloud, or Azure Monitor is that a SCOM replacement? In hybrid, there's one tool to rule them all. Is SCOM dead because of Azure Monitor? Does SCOM has no investments anymore? Well, all of the above is not true. Azure Monitor is not SCOM in the cloud. It's a completely different product. Azure Monitor is no SCOM replacement. And in a hybrid scenario, it's better to combine a couple of tools, but you need to choose which tool you're actually going to use as a primary tool. So when to use SCOM? That's straightforward if monitoring is necessary. And it's quite a simple approach. You need to think, if this happens, I want to trigger this, I want to get an alert. That's the flow. On-premises Microsoft systems, but also for Linux, hardware, software, and even for custom applications or custom devices. As long as you can get data out of it, you can monitor it with SCOM. And of course, you want to be notified on performance and availability, and you want to be notified on the spot. SCOM is very good in giving you straight away an alert when something happens. The common challenges, we all know them. When SCOM is installed, there is no management pack review. It's not a tool, set it and forget it. The POC installations turn into production, which is a really bad thing to do because you need to have proper sizing. Production is also development. There's no different SCOM environment. Don't forget the PowerShell layout. There are tons of alerts. There's no order and distribution of information and no owners of services. These are the common challenges I come across while doing a lot of projects. One which is not on here is that SCOM is sometimes misused, or the knowledge is not there. And if you don't use SCOM in the right way or in the right tools, you will probably have an issue later on. So we've seen when we're going to use Operations Manager or SCOM. So when are we going to use Azure Monitor? Of course, when we want to monitor Azure resources, because it's built in, it's the best tool to actually do it. If you want to create insights in your data, which is living in Azure, in your Azure Log Analytics workspace in this case. If you want to leverage the power of Log Analytics in the backend, you get easily insights across different data sets of different sources, meaning if you put everything in the same Log Analytics workspace, you can launch a query and the outcome can be the source to create an Azure Monitor alert, which in this case triggers an Azure action group, and you can go from there. Cloud strategy environments and monitoring is priority, of course. And you have to build your own strategy using Azure Monitor components. So, to resume, when to use SCOM Monitor or SCOM, or when to use Azure Monitor, it all comes down in your hybrid environment where your, let's say, resources are residing. Of course, we all want to have one tool to see everything. I'm going to showcase later on that it's more and more happening, but still you need to make sure that you use the right tool for the right process. And if you combine both tools, there's not an issue, but you need to know exactly when to use what and where. And it's always beneficial to keep a third, let's say, external list of things that needs to be monitored. For example, CPU needs to be monitored when it's above 80% for 5 minutes, for example. That's both possible to monitor in Ops Manager, and it's possible to monitor in Azure Monitor, but it needs to be basically somewhere kept in a central list that you know that that's the baseline. If that needs to change, you need to change it in Ops Manager, you need to change it in Azure Monitor, of course. So the secret weapon. The secret weapon basically to build a bridge between Azure Monitor and Operations Manager is the Azure Management Pack for SCOM. It has gone through a lot of iterations, but the latest iteration will actually, in the beginning you could just see the alerts of Azure Monitor, but the latest iterations now give you the full possibility to get all your resources into Operations Manager, which they can be used in other scenarios. So monitoring of the resources can be done straight from the console, the SCOM console. And it's not a replacement for Azure Monitor, it's just, let's say, the integration and building. When I started, let's say, giving sessions about the Azure hybrid environment and how to monitor it, I had a PowerShell script that I had to kick off and I had to run to create a ticket or to create an alert somewhere in SCOM. And that was my, let's say, integration. But now it has moved so much further, which I'm going to showcase later on. Unfortunately, or fortunately, it needs some configuration before it's fully operational. So we're going to go and look through the Azure Monitor, let's say, or the Azure Management Pack. And I'm also going to showcase you two different scenarios where you can do the same thing in both tools to get the same, let's say, result. So bear with me just a sec. I'm just going to move quickly to my environment. So first of all, I'm going to go into my Azure environment. Let's see, is this still recorded? Okay, so this is my Azure environment. Hold on, this needs to go down. So this is my Azure environment, and I basically have three subscriptions in here. I have Mass Prod, I have Mass Test, and I have Mass Demo. So what I want to do here, for example, this Mass Demo VM 001, this is running on the Azure platform, of course. It's just a standard server 2019. And if you want to start monitoring, you can basically go down here. And here you have the ability to do insights, alerts, metrics, or logs. If we're going to monitor as such, the tool itself, this is your starting point. So if I go into, let's say, for example, virtual machines, the insights for virtual machines, I do have one, and it's not enabled. So if I want to enable this, I get the insights and whatsoever. But I want to go to metrics, for example. If I go to metrics, okay. And in here I choose, and this is just one way to actually approach this. So if I go to production on the right here, and I go to my VM, I'm just going to choose virtual machines here, or here it is already, my virtual machine. I say, okay, fine. So my scope is now my virtual machine, and I want to see, for example, my processor time. I'm just going to close this. Processor percentage CPU. And this is the average. So here I have a clear view of how my CPU is doing. And if I want to create a new alert rule, I just click here. And I go back to my monitor environment and I'm able to create a rule. We all know the rule options of SCOM. So SCOM has also rule options. So for example, here I create whenever the average percentage CPU is greater than, that's already a predefined rule, or I can add a condition. And in here I can actually see what is going on. So over the last 6 hours, I get the results of the last 6 hours. And the average here, I want to make sure that I get an alert, I say 1%. And you see that every pinpoint will generate an alert at this point. So if I want to make this higher, you see that there, the last 6 hours, normally just one alert will be executed. So I'm just gonna say 3% something, or even less. I say that's fine. And in here you have the possibility that it's gonna look back for 1 minute or 5 minutes. and it is going to check every 1 minute. So if I click done, I see here the green tick, meaning that it's fine. And here also the cost. You need to bear in mind that in the backend, this is a search query which is launched every time. So if Microsoft or if there were no cost, everybody would just say set it and forget it. So it's not a big cost because it's 10 cents a month estimated, but still rethink or really think also to make sure that there's no huge load at the backend. Think or rethink to make sure that you only take the things which are necessary. So our rule is here, whenever the average percentage CPU is greater than 3%, I want to have an action group here, so I create an action group. An action group is the same thing as the remediation tasks in Ops Manager, for example. So in here I just create test, notifications. What do I want to do? I want to, let's say, email. So I'm just saying email, and in here I have the possibility to send a mail to my address. There we go. I click yes. I say email info, for example. I do next, and these are actions. And here you can execute an ITSM integration. You can run a runbook, a webhook. Not going to do any actions at this point. If I do create now, my alert rule is created. The action group is here put in. I still have here to fill in, let's say, CPU above 3%, I think it was. That's it. So if I do create an alert rule, this alert rule is now created. And you can do it machine specific, or you can do it for all machines which are in your environment, or even all machines which are now in your environment or coming into your environment. Basically the same thing you do with Ops Manager. So how are we gonna connect, or how are we actually gonna do this? Because you can do this in the console. There are also templates for that. But how are we actually gonna make sure that everything we do is also replicated into SCOM? If you're still working in Ops Manager, it's better to actually have your one plain console. So I'm just gonna quickly jump into my environment here. I'm gonna, let's see. So this is my environment. And if you have a normal, let's say, Operations Manager console, the first thing you need to do is go into Administration, download the management pack, which is the Azure Management Pack, Microsoft Azure Management Pack. And if you install that, a couple of things are happening. First of all, if you go into authoring, you have the possibility here to use Microsoft Azure Monitoring as a template. But first things first, you need to, let's say, connect your different management packs or your different subscriptions to your management pack, to your SCOM console. So you go to Microsoft Azure. Let me see, it's here. And in here you have the possibility to have all your subscriptions. So you just say add subscription. This is the first thing you need to do, because if you have an SPN, it's easier. Because that supports multi-factor authentication. In my case, I'm using user principal now just for demo purposes. You can enable all the different endpoints if you didn't change them. And in here, you give the username and password of a user which has access to the subscriptions. This button stayed at previous. So let's see again. And now it's actually looking into the environment and see, now I added all my applications, of course, all my subscriptions already. So the next step will be that you add a subscription, then you have to make sure that you have a server pool, and at that point you can start managing that subscription. So we already installed the management pack, we already made sure that the subscriptions are there, so basically everything is now pulled in the backend to start working with our environment. So remember that we really wanted to have the CPU level monitored or checked. So we're going to from our VMs. So I'm going to go back to authoring. I'm just going to start monitoring wizard. And in here, I'm choosing Microsoft Azure Monitoring. I'm just going to call it SCOM and Demo or something. There we go. I choose a management pack. I have a management pack here, which I can quickly delete. And this is a confusing one if you never done it before, because it seems like there are no subscriptions here which could actually be selectable. But if you click the down arrow, we can actually see here, for example, for I'm gonna take Dev now, and he has connected to the subscription. In here, I would like to choose service types. Click next, and here you have a full list of everything which is in here. I'm just going to go back because there's not much in here, so I'm just going to choose another one. Just going to choose demo. And in here I have, for example, the virtual machines. So I click the virtual machines. So everything which is in virtual machines will be monitored. I click next. Here you can do an exclude, meaning if you want to exclude some VMs, which are test VMs or whatsoever, you have a clear naming convention, you can actually exclude those machines. And here we get a full list of the metrics. So these are all the metrics which were also available when we created let's say the Azure Alert rule. So in here I also choose collect percentage CPU, meaning it's going to collect the info and it's going to put it in our backend, SQL backend. So you have to be sure, and we're going to alert if, let's say, greater than 3. So at that point we click next. We get a summary here. You can always go back to see whether it was successfully added, and that's the case. And at that point we do create. And now we have basically the same rule in Azure, in Operations Manager as we had in Azure. One of the key things that I really want to emphasize is that you really need to first tick the collect button before it's actually going to go in and get the info in your environment. A couple of other things which are now automatically included in our SCOM console. So if I go back to monitoring, I have here Microsoft Azure, and in here you see you have all the inventory, for example. The other is still not coming in, but I already have my prod VM, and there I am also, let's say, already gathering some performance metrics. For example, the percentage CPU I already did there. And this is basically the same graph that you saw when we were creating the rule, which is now also available in Operations Manager. So you really see that the gap is closed with the Azure Monitor Management Pack, that you can easily monitor your environment, but there's no automation. You really have to still tell Operations Manager that you want to collect the data and that you want to proceed, but you don't have to do anything, let's say, custom. So let's go back to my slide deck. Hold on. I still have 10 minutes left. Starting from 1. That's typically, of course, but I'll just run through it real quickly. Almost there. There we go. So basically, to resume how to choose or how to actually compare both tools, we need to make sure that we start with nothing. It's difficult, but I always try to start my projects with nothing and then go from there to really see what the business needs. And you need to make sure also one of the words which are on there, which was very important, is the proactive or reactive. It's the same thing with Operations Manager or Azure Monitor. If you do proactive monitoring, you can call people or you can take actions and say, okay, things are going haywire, we need to act now, or otherwise we will have business impact. If you only do reactive, people will call you, people will start rushing into your office or whatsoever because things are down and you were not aware. So it's always better to try to be proactive monitoring instead of reactive monitoring. So the correct starting point to actually choose, because I mentioned already that it's possible to take one or the other. You need to understand your on-prem, and you need to make sure that you always first check what you have on premises before you go to the cloud and vice versa. You need to go slow, meaning that you need to actually make sure that you think things through. A normal project that we initiate always takes first a workshop with different questions I mentioned before actually going in there. And you can see that both tools now came together into the Azure Monitoring Management Pack. So it's basically possible to fly in from both sides, but first of all, you need to take it slow to make sure that you have everything in place, and then you can start integrating. You need to identify your business processes or services, of course, and you need to map out the technology. You need to review your management packs and have that central list, for example. Your monitoring approach, again, be proactive, and the goal for any, let's say, monitoring project is, of course, that you have business continuity. Some top tips, which are based on a lot of experience, to be honest. Don't lose focus because you're fond of a tool. I mentioned it before, I think, in the beginning of the session. If you always think that one tool can monitor everything, you basically go in with that tool, but it's in your belief it's your Swiss pocket knife, but it's in the end you need a spoon and you only have like a knife or something. So you really need to make sure that the tool is up for the job, and break every question for insights or monitoring up in scenarios. If something breaks, where do I need to be monitored? What's the threshold and whatsoever? Check those scenarios to see which tool has a primary tool. Of course, they're coming closer together. Sometimes it's possible to use both tools, of course, to reach your goal. And check which tool can get the job done more easily. There's no point in complicating your life, while in the end one tool can do a better job than the other. I'm just going to go over this real quickly because time is not on my side. The solution, so basically if you have a solution, you made your choice. So after you made your choice, please stick with it. You communicate your choice to the stakeholders who brought up the scenario, and you tell them why this tool is the best tool for their scenario, and make sure that you also can fully cover the scenario. It's not the first time that someone barges into my office and say, why are you using Operations Manager? Because we need to move to Azure Monitor or vice versa. And then you need to have, let's say, a clear case, and you need to have clear examples why you actually chose that tool for that specific scenario. And again, if you need both tools to work together, you got already that trick up your sleeve, which is the Azure Monitoring Management Pack. So to sum this up, to wrap up this meeting or this webinar, SCOM and Azure Monitor are not separate tools. They work together and they are basically also doing the same things. And in the end, the combination, or in the end, they're both doing the same thing. They are pulling in data, they are doing an evaluation based on your thresholds, and they're taking, let's say, countermeasures, or they're taking active measures to actually make sure that it's not happening again, or that you're notified right on time. But again, it's up to you to actually put your knowledge and whatsoever in there to combine them to gain the true 360 monitoring view across your infrastructures, meaning across the things which are still on premises, the things which are in your environment, and even the moneymakers which are probably spreading both. You need to think scenarios, you need to clarify those scenarios, you need to get everyone involved. That's also something that I can't stress enough. Make sure that everybody's on the same page before you start doing things, because if down the road you need to make changes, or even you have to shift tools, a lot of work will have to be redone. And it's a better together world, or a better together scenario if you can combine both tools. Even if you have a set of tools which are only residing in Azure Monitor or only residing in SCOM, also check that you can use, let's say, the Azure Monitoring Management Pack for SCOM to get at least the insights, meaning just the graph or just the resources in. If you're not doing actively monitoring, still, if you have a distributed application or something, you can have those components already in there, that you have a true 360 monitoring view. So that was basically it. I am available for Q&A, and of course, if you see this recording afterwards, or if you have questions afterwards, feel free to connect with me at Twitter. That's at Dieter Wijckmans. You can always send me a mail at dwi@obvus.be. It's also on the master or the beginning slide. And in the end, I'm not that good at hiding online, so you can always find me if you have questions now or later. So for now, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy the rest of this Comathon, and talk to you later.